to share with you a little bit about my own experiences in Taiwan. So I graduated, just to give you a bit of background, I graduated from the University of New Brunswick, and at the time I had been trained as a secondary teacher with English language. At that time you could get a specialization in second languages, so I had ESL as a specialization. Plus I was trained as a Spanish teacher. Okay, so secondary, social studies, Spanish, English language teaching. And I was hoping to come back home to Ontario where I was born and raised, but it happened to be the time of the HESS government and a hiring freeze, and there were no jobs. And there was no way I was going to get into the school system. So I began to think about my options, and going overseas seemed really interesting. I mean, I love traveling. I mean, from the small experiences I had had up to that age. And I had also, I was curious about the world. So I decided to go to Taiwan. I had a friend who had taught many places who was in Taiwan at the moment. He said, it's amazing, you should come. But this was also at the time where language schools in Taiwan had just begun to start to blossom or mushroom. And so it was a really an on-the-ground arrive and figure it out type of time in the country. And so I remember getting my guidebook because that was really what I had. I didn't know very much about where I was going, getting on the plane and landing, and everything being in Mandarin at the time and not understanding a single word. So it really was an assault of the senses in terms of the experience. So I had applied for the position and everything from this part of this side of the world, and went over, and they provide you with a loan to begin housing and help you find your housing. The school I was with had teacher training, so you meet others when you first land, and then after a few days you separate and go to your different parts of the country. Taiwan itself is a very small island and located in South Asia. I was in Taipei, which is at the very northern point. If you see Taipei is that green circle, and if you look at the edge of it, I would say it's about a 45-minute scooter ride to the edge of the water. And so the country itself is quite small. The unique thing about Taiwan is one of the highest, it's one of the countries with the highest density, because in the middle of it is national parks and mountains. So the majority of the population lives along the edge of the country. Okay, so you're looking at how, when you're talking about cities, it's cities after city after city, you're just driving through in terms of if you're going around the country. To give you a sense of the density itself, you can think about Canada in our square kilometers being roughly 3 for Canadian population density, and then Taiwan being quite significant. So what does that mean in terms of where I was living and my experiences? I moved into an apartment. You look at your kitchen window, you are looking into your neighbor's kitchen and your neighbor. And then you look on the other side, and it's the same thing as well. And the type of position that I was hired into was a Bushiban, or after-school program, which Becky had kind of explained. And so my classes began after the children finished their own school. And so they were coming to us from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock. And I was primarily the teacher who was there to do speaking language, but we also did grammar as well as part of our teaching. And then I was also hired to do the kindergarten program. And so kindergarten at that time was immersion kindergarten, where the kids would spend the morning with me in a kindergarten classroom. I also had they were called CTs, or Chinese teachers, who was affiliated with me in the classroom, and she would stay with the students the whole day. So they would do English with me, language, math, science, everything with me in that language, and then they would also do Chinese instruction in the afternoon. And it became a real partnership because we stayed with the kids for several years, and it was a really good experience. In terms of Taiwan itself, there was a large push for English at that time. So there was a government push for English in the early 1990s, just saying that it's important. Also, people began to develop these language schools, but in 2002 they made it compulsory, part of the schools, and at all levels of education, from elementary to high school, to university. So you were seeing English language programs serving so many communities at one time. And as I said, there was a burgeoning of positions. So there are a lot of different language schools and different types of quality of language schools, I would say. So if you're ever considering going over, consider what type of school and what type of supports you have within those schools, because I can remember so I had a position that was in an established school for some time. It was the largest private school of publishing house in the country, whereas one of my friends was teaching in a school where he had 20 minutes classes, where he would jump around from class to class from 9 in the morning till 4 o'clock, and he would have to do a checklist of 20 things within a class. And that would include asking a student a question, how do you spell productivity, having a learned productivity, you can imagine what it looked like. And so it was, a very different experience for how to teach language in that 10 to 20 minutes with the teacher at the back doing the checklist versus mine, which was an immersion experience in the school, much like you have here as a teacher in the classroom. So I went with my BEd, which also opened a lot of opportunities for me. Some of the things I noticed in the language school that I was at, which is now called HESS International, at the time it was just called HESS, was that they really pushed total physical response. So they were trying to bring westernized, and I'm saying westernized in quotation because I have issues with what that word even means, but that's the language that we were given. Westernized pedagogy into Taiwanese classrooms or Taiwanese learning experiences. And one of those is total physical response, which Cummins talks about in your textbook, and that's the idea of movement and connecting it to language. Okay? The second one was music and stories. So trying to go beyond traditional textbooks and rote memorization to really find other ways to learn language in the classroom. So I learned a lot about that at the time. The third was English immersion, living, breathing English for 4 or 5 hours of the day. It was a unique experience for a lot of kids. A lot of conversation-based experiences, like you were saying, in Hong Kong. So sometimes non-native speaking teachers were hired to just do the speaking part of the courses, whereas your Chinese teachers would do a lot of the grammar. But at HESS, we also did the grammar, and it was an interesting experience because, like you've heard, sometimes the mechanics of language are not always easy for the native speaking teacher. So that partnership with the Chinese teacher would be like, you didn't teach that part with the grammar. And me sitting at the front of the room going, why are you not up here teaching the grammar? Like, what is the inequity that's happening in this moment right now? Okay? Okay, and then the last part is content-based instruction. So really getting an understanding for what it means to teach science in English, math in English, and how do you meet those different discipline demands. So a whole bunch of approaches. What were part of my observations? Okay, so English was seen as a gateway language to opportunities internationally or just status in society. So a lot of my parents were going above and beyond in terms of the commitment. They were working 2 jobs in order to send their kids to school, for either an after-school program or at HESS. And similarly, in India, my own experiences, the coveted English language medium schools, regardless of the quality, parents will go above and beyond to access the English language. There was also the native-speaking teacher and non-native English-speaking teacher in equity. It was really apparent to me that although these teachers were completely proficient, very skilled, excellent teachers, qualified, they were just not getting the recognition that they deserved, and also the pay, the remuneration. We were being paid twice as much as these teachers to do half the amount of work. Okay? There was also variations of English in the hierarchy of English. So I told this story to this class about Canadian English, and I walked in, and the students, the principal said, "Do you think you could switch your accent and maybe use American English?" And at that time, I was thinking, well, I can't. I don't know what to do. And then, but it was in that moment that you also begin to realize that there are certain standards of English that are valued. Particularly, for example, when I was there, it was at the start of kind of the English language education movement there. And so British English, American English, and Canadian English were the most coveted. Now if you look online, it'll be South African, Australia, New Zealand, like the population has changed dramatically. But still, there was that understanding of hierarchy of English. When you walk in the classroom, you are expected to teach a certain type of English to the students because the expectation is that English will allow them then to go to schools and universities or access higher education in another way. There was also the idea of the English identity. So I remember this being a very strange concept to me, but when I received my first, or when I entered into my first classroom, I was asked to name the 30 students. And part of it was giving them a new English identity. And when I wanted to learn their Chinese names, I wasn't allowed to. We were discouraged from it because the whole part of language learning was that you could also develop this new identity. And so the naming of students as a practice for every class you received, or for students who didn't come in with an English name, was a really interesting concept to me that I had never experienced before. Also thinking of that many names is quite difficult. And, but also, it was the issue of identity and language and troubling that area of it is very important. Really critically think about what message are we sending about your own identity when we are asking you to be renamed in that context. And then there were also strong demand at all levels. So I gave the example of how I was working for NGOs and schools and business English forums. And so you were seeing that the need for a qualified English language teacher and native speaker was being sought out by many communities. I was doing charity work for children who were being adopted by Canadian and American families so that they would have conversational English, okay, in order to, when they met their families. But then you're also working in bushy lawns or language schools, but you're also attending private tutoring. And then you can also go to English business language forums and sit at the table with business executives to help them run meetings in English and do more meetings. So the demand was just pervasive at all levels at that time. And so it was really, and I had no idea. Remember, I was just reading with my guide. And then part of my identity became a curriculum language developer. So as I told you, HESS was also the largest publishing house in Taiwan in that region, and now they publish in Singapore, China, etc. So I had the honor of developing a pilot program in the beginning for 6 months, and then being the lead author for a Treehouse series, which was an English immersion program for children ages 6 to 12. And so what we did is we designed everything from the classrooms to the teacher training program, to the textbooks, to the resources, being in a music studio with the musicians. It was a really, really exciting time, very intense, but also was that idea of a pilot on the ground program that then developed into a full-scale program that they still use today. Okay, so then I really began to see ELL in new ways, because part of my responsibility was universal design. I had to think about the environment, the optimal environment for learning English with the teachers that you had. So we were thinking of classrooms and how you move beyond what was currently happening, and it's been some time, so I'm sure the Taiwanese system has changed, but the rote memorization practices that were happening in the classrooms. Also the idea of curriculum materials. I really began to understand the importance of scaffolding and how you move a learner and you progress them from one stage to another. There was the issue of cultural appropriation. So as part of the job, I was writing kids' books. And I can always think about, I wanted to write a story about camping. But then when we went to the artist to draw what it looks like to camp, I hadn't really cognitively made that connection that to camp in Taiwan is something very different than to camp in Canada. So for example, you're not doing rural camping, you're doing a pickup truck with everything you need in it, including your rice cooker, to the campsite. Okay, and then you're all camping side by side with the whole family. So culturally, I was becoming more aware of the danger of imposing certain ideas and beliefs into a context. And it was that fight, though, because there was that want for the Western culture, but also the integrity of honoring the culture that you're within. And I really did feel that battle fighting in my position there. Same thing, Bob's Grocery Store, the concept of how grocery stores look. This was also a big conversation with the artists at the time. Okay? So the danger of cultural appropriation and imposition, and that idea that I also began to question my purpose as an English language teacher in that environment, because I didn't feel like there were a lot of spaces to critically think about it, which ended up bringing me back to Boise for my master's at the end of it. And I also appreciated moving beyond traditional methods of rote memorization. I learned French at a time where it was drills, okay, and that's how you learn French, but it was really pushing beyond that to think of the whole child. So it was an amazing experience. I say that, it really did transform my life. I had initially only gone for 1 year. I came back after 3.5, and mostly my mom came out there and she said, "Why are you not coming home?" So I put her on the back of my scooter and I showed her how beautiful Taiwan was, and she understood it. But eventually I had all these burning questions in my mind about global imperialism and what we're doing as English language teachers, why we're doing it, and how to do it in a way that really honors it. People who did go there, some people went there for all kinds of reasons, and not everybody had a BA or a Master's of Teaching. I can tell you that the opportunities that come with going with a teaching degree were endless. You could do everything from TV shows to being in the classroom. It really is a place at the time where you could be open to anything. But at the same time, it was also just such a warm and welcoming environment. The families and the children, they look amazing. Some of them are funny, they're so cool. And, like the families and the children's connections you make will last a lifetime. But also, I think that I traveled the world when I was there. I learned how to speak another language when I was there. And in the end of it, it broadened my understandings of what it means to be a teacher and to teach. So although I have all these critical aspects of it that I think anybody walking into a new situation really has to be aware of what is happening with English language teaching and how we're imbalances that come with it. I do feel for me it gave me the most as a person in that ways. Okay, that I just wanted to share that with you.